Hey people, I'm Temi if you're new here, and today I've got the new Acrylograph pens. So I'll be doing an in-depth review and you can decide if they're worth the money. So I posted these on my Instagram and I told you to ask me questions. So I'll be answering your questions during this video. And disclaimer, these pens were kindly sent to me by Archer and Olive, so big shout out to them, thank you so much. But don't think for a second that will take my review. If you've watched my other reviews, you already know that I'm always honest. And although this video is coming at you in September, it was actually filmed in July. So this isn't even a first impressions anymore. I've used the pen since I filmed the video, so I've got a lot of tea for you. Grab a snack and let's go. The pens come in this beautiful white box, and isn't it stunning, guys? Each pack has 8 coloured pens, a white pen and a colourless blender, and it also comes with 2 spare nibs. On the left side is the blending palette, and on the right side we've got directions for use and instructions for blending. So my opinion on the boxes, I think they're absolutely gorgeous and quite unique. I've never received pens in boxes like these. I don't know about you, but there's something special about opening this kind of box. It feels quite luxurious. However, I do think it's a bit of an overkill, especially if you order multiples. I wonder if they could do it so if you're ordering multiple colors, or say if you're ordering the 2 nib sizes from one color range, then you would have it all in one box. Does that make sense? I don't even know if they can do this logistically, but I just think waste wise it would be better. I have all 3 sets of colors. I've got the primary collection, which have the bright vibrant colors. I've got the tropical collection, which is my favorite, and it has more of the pastel tones, and then the jewel collection, which has the muted colors. So as I mentioned, each set also has a blending pen and a white pen and 2 spare nibs. I think the colour selection is absolutely stunning. I love how they've been grouped, so you can literally buy a set depending on your colour preferences and your tastes. So double thumbs up for the colour selection. And now for the price. Oh my gosh, these pens are not cheap. So they retail at $32 per pack, and I don't know much about other acrylic pens, but I do think these pens are expensive. There's no doubt that Archer and Olive is a luxury brand. You know, the finish of the website, the quality of the notebooks have been good, the quality of the packaging, everything's quite prim and proper. And they really changed the game when it came to having like aesthetic bullet journal supplies, in my opinion. I would say if you're a beginner with acrylic pens, or maybe even art in general, so you don't really know how to use them, this is an expensive way in, and I don't think it's necessary. There are probably other cheaper alternatives out there. But obviously, I'm not going to tell you how to spend your money. However, I would say if you're more experienced and would like the color selection that these offer, then definitely go for it. Remember, this is a small business, this is a woman-owned business, so if you want to support the business, then 100% go for it. Also, if you do decide to get these, I've got a 10% discount code, so you can get some money off. Every little helps, right? Now I'll go into detail about each pen. So I have both the 3mm and the 0.7mm pens, and I do like the way the pens feel. I think it's a very sleek design and they're quite thin. It has the colour on the lid and also on the barrel, as well as the size of the nib. So the 3mm nib is quite thick and it's very easy to remove. You want to be able to remove it easily because when it's time to replace the nibs, you don't want to be fighting with the pen. Also, it's just as easy to return this 3mm nib to the barrel, which is fantastic. Now for the 0.7mm, and this is where the fighting began. So the pen barrel is the same, it just has a pointy tip icon and then it says 0.7. But it was so difficult to remove with my nails. I don't know if it's the nail or the smooth surface of the nib, but it was a struggle. Honestly, I had such a hard time removing these. The nib itself is 17mm in length, but it's got this plastic bit at the end, which makes it harder for the ink to actually come through. And it also means that you can't just flip the nib when the end gets frayed, so you have to replace the entire nib. So with pen activation, oh my gosh, the rumors are true. It's going to take you forever and a day to activate these pens. To my understanding, these are acrylic paints in pen form, so they do need to be activated so that the ink gets flowing. But since I had around 54 pens to activate, I think I've got a technique now. And I found that the easiest way to do it was to shake the pen for around 2 minutes and then try pumping the ink through. So what I found was shaking for less time means you need more effort to actually get the ink to flow. So the longer that you can shake it for without getting tired, the better. and then you just press it on scrap paper until you see ink coming through and you're good to go. So it wasn't actually a difficult process, but I would say it was quite lengthy. And then for the 0.7mm nib, it took longer and felt more tedious. But glory, we've got ink. I ended up holding a handful of pens and doing a handful at the same time because I wasn't trying to sleep here. But you just have to be careful because depending on how rough you are with the pens, the ends actually start fraying. And that is very disappointing because, you know, after spending so much on pens, you don't want it fraying before you've even used it for the first time. And finally, we're going to do some testing. So this spread setup was inspired by Hayley from Hayley Remda Art. Love her. I'll link her video down below. But I tried to include as many things as possible. So I've got cutouts from different notebooks. So they're all Archer and Olive notebooks, so they're 160 GSM, but I've got the normal white paper, I've got craft paper, and then a blackout notebook. So I'm going to do swatches of every single colour on every single notebook. And then I'm also at the end of the video going to do swatches on other notebooks, so thinner paper. So you have an idea about the ghosting and bleeding. Then I'll do a series of tests. So I've got smudge test, blend test, layering to see how well the acrylograph pens layer over each other, what layers over the pens and what it layers on top of. And then also comparison to other pen brands, some popular brands that I own. Finally, I've got the black paper strip at the bottom because I'll be testing the white acrylograph pens compared to my favorite white pens and see how well they work. So in the end, I'll give you my final thoughts, but let's get on with the testing. I've grouped the swatches based on the coloured sets, and I've done it on every single colour that I've got. From first impressions, the primary set actually brings out very nice opaque colours. You can see that the yellow wasn't very opaque and I had to go over it with a second layer. I would say definitely put a second layer after it's completely dried, but after the second layer was down, it was very opaque and very nice. I was probably most impressed with how the primary colour set performed. As you can see with the tropical colour set, there's a lot more patchiness, like especially on the black paper, the blues, the yellow, it was just looking a bit ashy. I really wasn't for it. Again, if you're patient and you want to put a second layer on, then it goes completely opaque. But, you know, from the first layer, first impressions, it's not great, especially on the black paper. And then we've got the jewel set. So I don't even know. The jewel sets, again, with the patchiness, you can see in the bottom row, the yellow and the green, and then the blue, the burgundy kind of colour. It was just a bit patchy. I found that most of the patchiness I found with some of these swatches was mostly on the black paper, so I would say you have to be careful using the acrylographs in the blackout book. But sometimes I also found it on the craft paper. Overall, the white paper performed quite well in terms of those swatches. Now for the smudge test. So I first used the 0.7mm and you can see how it applies. The first test was waiting for 15 seconds and as you can see, no smudge at all. Then I tried it for 10 seconds and again, and just looking at how the 0.7mm applies, it's not always consistent ink flow, which I did not like. Sometimes it got a bit patchy, sometimes it was like stringy, but it also passed the 10-second smudge test. And then finally we've got the 5-second smudge test and it also passed that, so well done to the 0.7mm. Next, I tried this purple colour in the 3mm colour. You can see that this applies with so much more vibrancy and richness and colour, but unfortunately failed the 15-second smudge test, so I guess you already know how the rest of them are gonna go. Yeah, the rest of them smudged worse than worse. For the first blend test, I'm going to try a blue to green colour gradient, and I'm going to try the method that they explained in the cover, where you put both colours down and then you mix it with the clear blender and then, you know, use the colour to pick it up. But look at this mess, guys. Like, this was very disappointing. And I don't know if it's that I don't have enough ink down, but I tried to put more ink down and to no avail, to be very honest. It was quite hard because it dries so quickly. So it's like, how much ink do you put down that it's not too much ink that the whole thing dries, but enough ink to collect enough on the nib to then make a nice blend. Like, this was just such a mess for me, and maybe I did something wrong. Someone tell me if I did something wrong in the comments, but you can see I've come back to the ink and it's just scratching off because the ink is dry. For the next test, I'm gonna try dipping a color into another color's ink. And this is something that people do for blending gradients for calligraphy all over the internet. I'm sure you've seen it. So I've just got some red down on the paper, and then I use the tip of a 0.7mm pink pen to try to create a gradient, and I'm just going through. And as you can see, this formed quite a nice gradient. The only thing I would say is the 0.7mm just brings out scratchy ink. Like, I don't know how to get around that. And again, tell me in the comments if I'm doing something wrong, but it just brought out very scratchy ink, so I didn't like that. I've got the same two colours from earlier, and I'm going to try the second technique of dipping the first colour into the second one and see how that works for the blending, because the whole mixing it and then using the blender did not work. So I'm dipping the greenish colour into the blue colour and really trying to soak up as much ink as possible. With this 3mm nib, it just absorbs the ink so well, and look at this smooth gradient. I'm not gonna lie, this is beautiful scenes. Like, I'm actually very impressed with this blend. I think this is gorgeous. It's not as scratchy or patchy as the 0.7mm, which is also good. You can see on this other piece of card that it just continues with the blend as the original greenish color comes through. So yeah, I'm not mad at that blend. Now I'm going to try my final blend with a yellow and an orange, and this is more of a blend that I would use with my colour and pencil portraits or colour and pencils. I'm just doing half of the rectangle with the yellow and the other half with the orange, and then using some of the yellow to try to blend into the orange, and then using the colourless blender to mix it. So I'm not mad at this blend at all. I kind of wish the colourless blender had something inside, like water or another kind of mixing medium, so that it would really bring it together. But I'm not mad at the blend. I think it created a really smooth blend, and that's probably my favourite blend on the page. Now for some layering tests. So this first test is acrylograph on acrylograph. Does it layer over each other, or how well does it layer over each other? So I decided to do a light colour on one side, which is the yellow, and then a black on the other side to see how well other colours lay on top. And using the 0.7mm purple pen, you can see that it produces a very opaque colour, and in fact every other colour I put on the page just ended up being a very opaque colour. Like, you can't see any of the yellow through. I think that's very impressive, because it just means you can put down a whole wash of colour and not have to worry about, you know, getting around things for the background. I'm very curious to use that for some future arty spreads, because it layers seamlessly in my opinion. And even on the dark side, now this is what impressed me. Look at this blue. Like, it just, honestly, on the black acrylograph, it just layers beautifully. Like, guys, can you see what I'm seeing? Because this is good. As you can see, I had some issues with the 0.7mm, and I've been saying this from the start, but this 0.7, the nib, I don't know what it is about it, but half of the time the ink wasn't coming through very well. Sometimes I would shake it again, like reactivate, and then it would come through again. But yeah, it wasn't great. I decided to do these rough outlines on the flowers and see that those both also layer really well on the acrylograph, so I'm very impressed about that, and I'm excited for that. Next, I'm trying to see what acrylographs layer over. So I just use normal watercolour paint at the top, and then I use the metallic watercolour at the bottom. All the supplies are linked below if you're interested in a specific supply. But yes, the purpose of this test was just to see, after the watercolour has dried, how well will the inks layer over. For this, I just tried the black and white 0.7mm pens. With a quick sweep motion, you can see that it layers quite well over both. You can see what the 0.7mm does, where it kind of splits into two lines. I don't know what is wrong with the end, but it just wasn't great. So with the white circles, you can see that it layers quite opaque. At the top on the blue, it kind of looks like it's blending into the water, so it doesn't look as vibrant or as opaque anymore. You can definitely still see the white. But looking at the end of the black 0.7mm pen, I'm not really sure what's causing the problem. It looks like, I guess, a sediment of product, and I've wiped some of it off, so it's acting a little better. But yeah, I'm not really happy with that nib. Now I tried to mimic the flowy shape I made with the black with the white, and this is where you can see crack. So it just does not layer very well. I don't know if it's the white pen specifically, or the fact that not enough ink was flowing through, or the type of nib. I don't know what it was, but that white did not layer very well for bigger motions. This final test is to see which pens layer well over the acrylograph. I'm just doing a big wash, not really a wash, I'm basically covering the square with the grey pen, and then I'm just going to use a series of black pens to see which ones layer well over it. And you can see that some of the ink stopped flowing, so I feel like acrylograph pens or acrylic pens are quite hard to work with. To me, they seem quite high maintenance. As I mentioned, this is my first experience with acrylic pens as a whole, so it might be worth trying other acrylic pens to see if I'll have the same issues. But with these, yeah, sometimes it was just a bit patchy, a bit here and there. The pens I'm trying are quite popular pens, so hopefully you'll find a pen you're interested in here. The first one is the Faber-Castell Pitt pen, and as you can see, it layers pretty well over. Next we've got the Sepa Japanese material calligraphy pen, and oh my gosh, this is literally my favorite brush pen ever, by the way. But you can see the difference here where this has a much more opaque black, and whatever material is in that pen is just excellent. Next we've got the Stabilo Pen 68, and this one is a little bit more see-through, kind of like the Faber-Castells. Next, we've got the Tombow pen, and again, the Tombow is quite see-through. By the way, I wouldn't use the Stabilo or the Tombow on top of the Acrylograph pens. The Faber-Castell wasn't too bad, but the Sepa definitely. Next, we've got the Staedtler fine liner, which is the normal fine liner I use for my daily bullet journaling. And this also ended up kind of see-through. It's hard to see on camera right now, but you might be able to see it later. Next, we've got another Tombow pen. This looks like a hard tip calligraphy pen, and oh my gosh, I don't know what's in that ink, but it was excellent. It was basically like the Sepa Japanese pen. Finally, we've got the Crayola Super Tips, and again, that was trash. It was just basically see-through. The pens that I would recommend layering over the acrylographs are the Sepa and the second Tombow. That is it. And yeah, that's it for the layering test. I'm really happy I did this test because I think it will help me to use acrylographs properly in the future. If you're taking anything from this test, is the acrylograph on top of acrylograph is excellent, and then only a few pens layer well over it, and layering the acrylographs over watercolour might be hit and miss. Now I'm just doing a quick swatch, I guess, of different markers. So I was asked to compare the acrylographs to some markers that I have. As I mentioned, I've never used acrylic markers before, so I don't have any of those to compare it to. But the first marker I'm comparing it to is the Crayola Super Tip, and you can see that even though I mentioned about the acrylographs being quite patchy in ways, you could definitely layer over it to produce a smooth surface. With the Crayolas and then the Tombow, you can almost see the pen marks, so you can see where you've applied more colour. This last pen I use is the Pentel pen, and to be honest, I wouldn't even use it over large areas, but I just thought I'd compare it since I have it as well. But in conclusion with this test, it's clear that the acrylograph for covering large areas is much better than any of these other pens. And the final test of the day, we made it. So this is just comparing the acrylograph white pens to my favorite white pen. So I've got the 0.7mm first, which looks like it did a pretty good job, and then I've got the 3mm, which just looks a bit see-through, a bit dead. Comparing that side by side with the Posca, you can see that with one application of the Posca is so much more opaque. Even when I go over the 3mm again, it just doesn't really produce an opaque finish. Finally, I've got the Sakura Jelly Roll at the end, and that to me was a lot better than 0.7mm as well. I don't know what it is about the formula, but these acrylograph pens just did not create the opaque white I would have expected from them. Saying that, I don't think you would buy the whole set for the whites. They don't actually sell the whites separately, but the whites wouldn't be a decider for me to buy the set. And for the final test, I know I said final before, but the final test is just the white acrylograph pen on craft paper and black paper. And as you can see from that 0.7mm, I really needed to fight to get a good coverage of ink. I don't think that's great because at the end of the day, if you're writing with the 0.7mm, it's going to be very tedious to have to go over the same areas over and over again just to get good coverage. So I wouldn't advise using the white 0.7 at least in a craft paper notebook. The 3mm was kind of the same, not really that opaque. So again, I'm not too happy with the whites in this set. So I really know I said final earlier, but one of your questions on Instagram prompted me to do this actually final test. and it was just to test the acrylographs on other paper that isn't archer and olive paper. So this first notebook is an 80 GSM paper, and I just did a range of colors on the 3mm and then the 0.7, and you can see that it ghosts very badly. To be quite fair, basically everything ghosts in this notebook. Then I'm also testing my bullet journal from last year, which is the Limome journal. It's 120 GSM, and doing the exact same colors and trying to see if it ghosts. And yes, we do have some ghosting. It's very faint, but the ghosting is definitely there. One thing I would say about this notebook, and I'm just actually going to show you in the notebook, is that I experienced a lot of ghosting. So that might be the nature of my spreads. I did quite artistic spreads, and with my markers, I might have gone over the same spot a few times, but just looking through my journal, you would definitely see ghosting throughout the journal. Okay, so we've made it to the end of this video, and I'm just going to give you my final thoughts very quickly. Some of the pros of the Acrylograph pen is the color range. I think they have beautiful colors, beautiful sets. The next pro, the ability to layer these on other media or to also layer them on top of each other, I think is just amazing. Finally, I'll just say the vibrancy of the colors is definitely a positive. And now for the cons. The price. I think it is very expensive. If you're trying to decide which one to get, I would say 100% get the 3mm in whichever color range you're interested in. That 0.7, I don't think it's worth it. Speaking about the 0.7, the overall quality of that nib I just didn't think was great. And finally, the blending. So I showed 3 different methods of blending. The first method of blending just was not it. It just came out super scratchy and just not good at all. With the other methods of blending, it was a little bit better, and I think in the future I might just use an actual paintbrush with water to do some blending. And yeah, those are all my thoughts about these pens. You just have to decide if it's worth it for you, if the price point is worth the quality that you've seen today. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm quite curious to know what you guys think. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you on my next one. Goodbye.